Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. So unfortunately, COVID-19 is still a thing. And I wanted to speak to some risk factors for COVID-19 that you may not be thinking about. Certainly things that aren't really being discussed by, sort of our public health experts and officials who are disseminating information. And this is regardless of the vaccine debate, whether you've been vaccinated or unvaccinated. That doesn't really apply to these really important sort of risk factors, because we know that the vaccination that's out there is what we call a leaky vaccine. People could still get COVID with the vaccine. People could still pass it on. It does seem to maybe decrease some of the effects, some of the symptoms of COVID, but you can still get it. You can still pass it on. So it's still important part of the discussion that when somebody gets vaccinated, they're not perfectly armored to decrease completely the chance of giving and getting COVID. So I wanted to speak to some of these things. From the CDC's website, there's two sort of main risk factors for, being hospitalized, kind of a harsher outcome of COVID, which is obesity. That's been the number one, I think, during the whole process, during the whole COVID era. But number two is anxiety and fear disorder. That's the one I want to speak to. I've actually spoke quite a bit about obesity and metabolic syndrome and how that combination of things is really the number one risk factor for kind of a poor and sort of long COVID process. But I didn't really speak much about yet the fear and anxiety part of it. So really what that comes down to is stress management. And stress management is something that it's kind of an old term. I wish we had a better term because it's almost too broad, but I want to speak to it with three main sort of pillars that we can start to incorporate in our life. And if you suffer from any of these things, really you want to work hard to try to mitigate these so that you can decrease your overall stress load and improve your resilience to getting COVID. So remember, there's two different things here. There's SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus, and COVID, which is the condition or the disease. And they're not really interchangeable, even though kind of out there you hear them sort of interchangeable, but they're technically not. The virus is the virus and the condition is COVID-19. So anyhow, speaking to stress management, stress is one of these things where there's actually kind of a triad of stress. There's mental emotional stress. That's what we think about when we go, I'm stressed out from all the news and blah, blah, blah. That's mental emotional stress. And then there's physical stress. Physical stress can be an unresolved injury or headaches or some kind of physical ailment that's kind of, making the body work harder or give you constant or frequent symptoms. And then there's biochemical stress. Biochemical stress can be things like blood sugar dysregulation or something going on kind of internally in the body that can be a stress, or maybe even having an ongoing infection, let's say even outside of the COVID conversation, that could be kind of stressing the system biochemically. So speaking to those three different pillars, one of the key risk factors or one of the key things that you can do for stress management specifically is diet. I've talked about diet, of course, when it relates to metabolic syndrome and obesity, but how does it relate to stress management and this kind of stress and fear disorder that is the second risk factor for having being hospitalized with COVID? And here's what it is. It speaks to really that biochemical side of the equation of stress management, or of, one of the key stressors, because here's one of the things is that if we're eating foods that are inflammatory, think of like sugars, processed grains, products. I've had episodes on ultra processed foods and how common they are. I spoke about that fairly recent published article out of Tufts University that looks at the diets of teenagers, and I think it was over 60% of the diet of teenagers was ultra processed food. And this was across all socioeconomic levels, meaning that it's a choice. Even families who could provide healthy, fresh food are actually choosing to have ultra processed food. And I talked about on that video, it's the, ready to heat and ready to eat meals and, frozen pizzas and frozen burritos and, these kind of packaged lunch sort of things with all this sort of processed fake food. So that's ultra processed food. That's a considerable sort of inflammatory trigger for the system. That's one thing. Another one is blood sugar dysregulation. As your blood sugar goes up and down, if you're choosing foods that cause a big spike of blood sugar, of your glucose going up, that presents a stressor to the system. The blood sugar drops down, that presents a stressor to the system. So these kind of diets are, really key stressors. And that's on top of mental emotional stress and maybe some physical stress that you have. So as many of these, kind of triad of stressors that we can manage, the more that's going to decrease our overall stress load. So these are things that are within our locus of control. The things that you choose to eat are very much within our control. Takes a little bit of process. If you follow a pretty, standard American diet, unfortunately, which is rich in sort of processed oils, processed foods, this ultra processed kind of foods, then you want to start taking kind of meal by meal switches into healthier, whole, natural foods. So that's number one as a key sort of component and risk factor and, let's say, way of mitigating the stress and fear, anxiety component of a risk factor for COVID. Number two on the list is sleep. And from a stress management standpoint, I don't think anything else that we can do in our life, in our diet, in our lifestyle for stress management than sleep. There's such a kind of miraculous, magical process that happens when you go to bed at night. It's something that selection pressure has maintained. Because if you think about evolutionarily, sleep doesn't make sense. You're unprotected, you can't forage for food, you can't make babies. There's like lots of genetic and biological reasons why you would think sleep would be something that should be worked out of sort of the gene pool, and it doesn't. It maintains, and frankly, it maintains through every life form that you can come up with. There's some version of sleep that's happening. So it's really, really important to basic biology. And we need sleep. I won't go into all the different deep, kind of layers of sleep, the rapid eye movement and then non-rapid eye movement, REM and non-REM. There's some really cool nuances between those different things. But just for this topic here, you just really need to do what you can to optimize sleep, because from a stress management standpoint, this rewiring of, neurons that happen at night, there's management and balance of the neurotransmitters. Those are like serotonin and dopamine. Those very much have a lot to do with our perceptions of stress. Our whole HPA axis, which I've talked a lot about, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and the adrenal hormones feeding back to the brain and kind of like this feedback cycle, that gets sort of renourished and regenerated and rejuvenated at night. At night, that's where growth hormone comes out and does all of its fixing of, repairs tissues. And there's such a rejuvenation process, not only of the brain, which is maybe the most important thing, but everywhere else in the body as well. So I can't overemphasize that enough. And you would hear that from, most experts who understand neuroscience and neurobiology. There's nothing that we can do to really replace sleep. There's no shortcut, there's no biohack. You just have to sleep. And, if you want 8 hours of sleep, you really need to be, well, let's say it this way. If you need, a minimum of 7 hours of sleep, you really need to be in bed for 8 hours of sleep. That's kind of what it takes. So really key to do that. Obviously, there's some distraction management that you should maybe consider at night. Most experts think that you want to decrease the blue light exposure from your handheld devices a couple hours before bedtime. Start to use low-lying lights in the house. You don't want to use a whole lot of overhead lighting as the night goes on, because if you think about it, we can make our homes like it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a spring day. We could modify the climate in our house, we can modify the lighting in our house, but really even though we can do that, that's not sort of normal for our chronobiology, from sort of the timing and working with how our bodies are supposed to be relating to the outside world. And so as the day goes on, as evening kind of starts to set in, late afternoon, evening, as the sun starts to go down, start to bring the lights down in the house a little bit. Instead of using overhead lights, mimicking sort of the sun, you want to use kind of low-lying lights that mimic more the horizon. Use, lamps on the countertop or desktop, those kind of things. So some, basic, distraction management things at night to really kind of set the body up for proper sleep at night. So sleep is number 2 on the list of things that you could and should do to really help manage this kind of fear and anxiety disorder, which is number 2 reason for kind of a hospitalization outcome of COVID-19. The third thing on the list is exercise. Physical movement, whatever you want to call it. Some people are just have aversion to the word exercise, and it just gives them stress and anxiety. But the thing is just movement, just broaden it to movement. Most people like to do something that involves movement. Maybe they're not going to be a runner, marathon runner, or a gym rat. There's like a million other things that you can do. You can go just a walk, whatever your favorite place in nature. Maybe it's a park. Maybe it's by the ocean, or maybe it's somewhere out in the woods. Maybe your favorite museum. Go for a long walk in your favorite local museum. It's just getting out and moving. Maybe you want to just do some random push-ups during the day. But if we go with even kind of the government recommended amount of daily, or actually weekly exercise, 150 minutes per day, you can break that up 150 minutes 3 times a week. 150 minutes per week. So it could be 3 50-minute sessions. You can break that up however you want to, but 150 minutes per week is very, very doable, even in the busiest schedules. Even people who really don't like this kind of physical movement, take up a Tai Chi class, take up a yoga class, Pilates, whatever. Just do some kind of motion, some kind of body movement that you like, that you think you can be compliant with and sustainable and actually enjoy. It's supposed to be fun. Take up tennis, take up pickleball, take up golfing. Just something where the body moves on a regular basis is really, really key. So those are the 3 things. You want to optimize your diet with foods that are whole and natural products, natural foods. This is a broad variety of vegetables. You really want to feature greens. You want to feature the sulfur-based foods, which are great for like detoxification of the system. Your brassica family foods, which are like your cabbage and bok choy, broccoli, and those kind of things, kale. And then you want to have mushrooms, which are fantastic kind of immune system modulators. You want to make sure that you have your kind of dark, colored foods. That's where all the polyphenol antioxidants are, like beets and blueberries and blackberries and those kind of things. So these are the different kind of vegetable groups. Make sure you're getting good grass-fed, pastured, high-quality animal protein in regularly, healthy fats. So these kind of whole foods, and there's a gazillion recipes out there. We can combine all these things to make them taste really good using lots of sort of dried herbs and stuff like that. So that is not the point of this particular information today, but there's a lot of information out there on what and how to do a good, healthy diet. And this is for stress management, remember. Number 2 on the list was sleep. I can't overemphasize it. You got to get proper sleep. You'll be amazed at how much better you feel just kind of in general, certainly from a stress, kind of standpoint. And then we got to get moving. So those are the 3 things. These are the things that we can really do for that number 2 risk factor that really you don't hear any of our health experts that I've seen give us any real clear and consistent information about this, but it's number 2 on the list. It's a major, major risk factor problem, and it's something that a lot of people, and an increasing amount of people, are dealing with, is fear and anxiety disorder. So hopefully that's helpful. These are things that you can start incorporating today, like now. So hopefully that helps. I will keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.